Hello, welcome back to our channel, and this is a channel where we give you reviews, playthroughs, unboxings. We generally like to talk a load of bollocks about tabletop gaming in general, and in this video we're going to be talking about an ancient game that was released I think in 1984. It is what some people regard as a seminal war game. We're going to be talking about Axis and Allies, the Anniversary Edition, and in this game you'll be taking the role of either the Axis, which is Germany, Japan and Italy, or you'll be taking the role of the Allies, which is the United States and China, with the UK and the Soviet Union, and you'll be pitting yourself against each other, trying to capture strategic cities that will allow you to win the game. So in this video we're going to be giving you a very brief overview of the rules, because this game is a bit of a behemoth. We'll be telling you what we do like, what we don't like. Then we'll come back and we'll tell you whether or not Axis and Allies, the Anniversary Edition, is still worth playing nearly 40 years after it was first released in its first form. But this was first released in 2007 in this form. I know it's confusing, but we'll be telling you whether or not it's worth playing today and in the future. So remember, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below, and we'll see you after this. So, Axis and Allies, how'd you play this game? So this game is a bit of a beast, so we're going to skip over a lot of the rules here. If you're really that interested, then we recommend you go and watch a video by this guy called Harsh Rules. He does the best tutorial that is currently available for that, so there you go. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to divide yourselves out into two different sides, right? You've got the Axis powers and you've got the Allies powers. You're going to take all the stuff that is associated with each of the powers, and then you'll do a lot of setup. You're placing different pieces out onto the board, depending on whether you're going for the 1941 scenario or whether you're going for the 1942 scenario, right? Once you've set the game up, you've got to remember that the United States will be taking control of the Chinese. There's just a few infantry in that region because they're not classed as an industrialised nation, so there's no industrial complexes there. But forget that. Once you've gone through the arduous process of setting the game up, then you are ready to go. So the currency in this game is what's known as IPCs, or Industrial Production Certificates. This is basically paper money that you're going to be using to buy units. So each faction is going to get a starter number of IPCs. The British get the most because they've got the British Empire against the United States. Germans get quite a bit, and it gradually goes down to the poor Italians, who basically have bugger all. So dependent on what scenario you're playing, you're going to have a different turn order. If you're playing the 1941 scenario, then the Germans will go first. If you're playing the 1942 scenario, then Japan will go first, and you will stick to that turn order throughout the game. So this game is divided into 6 different phases. The first phase is the research and development phase. This is apparently a new thing that they introduced into the Anniversary Edition, and what you'll do, you'll be able to buy research and development tokens for 5 IPCs each at the beginning of this phase, and you'll be able to essentially gamble these tokens on a die roll. So what you do, you'll choose one of the 2 different research columns and you roll a die, and if you get a 6, then you roll another die, and that will determine what research you have bullied your scientists into producing for you. So some of the breakthroughs that you can get in this game. If you're going through chart number 1, you might be able to get the advanced artillery breakthrough, which allows each of your artillery to now provide great support. 1 artillery unit can support 2 infantry per attack. 2 infantry, when coupled with 1 artillery unit, can have an attack value of 2. Or you might end up with war bonds, in which case, during your collect income phase, which is one of the phases later on in the turn, you'll roll a d6 and collect that many extra. If you choose to go on the breakthrough chart 2, you might go for radar, which allows your anti-aircraft gunfire now to hit on a roll of 1 or 2 instead of just the 1. So these breakthrough technologies are quite powerful, but then again, they are quite difficult to get because you do need to roll a die. And you've got to remember, if you do manage to successfully roll a 6, you're going to lose all of your research and development tokens. But if you don't do it, then you'll get them all back, right? So it's a bit of a gamble. So the second phase in this game is you're going to order units. There's loads and loads of different units in this game. You've got infantry, you've got artillery, you've got bombers, you've got fighters, And you've got sea units like aircraft carriers, you've got destroyers, cruisers, and then you've got transporters which can transport land units across sea zones, right? So what you do, you order all your units, you can buy as much as you can pay for. You'll stick those units into the mobilisation zone, which is a specially reserved area on the board, because you ain't going to be able to place these units until the end of your turn, right? You'll also be able to do repairs to your industrial complexes if they've taken any damage from bombers, and you'll be able to spend 1 IPC to take a damage marker off of those. Basically, you'll just be able to use this phase to build a cracking war machine that's going to spank the opponent's backside, right? So phase number 3 in this game is the combat move phase. This is where you're going to be moving your units around the board, but you can only move them into hostile territories. It doesn't matter whether there's a hostile unit in there. If there's nothing in there, then you can take it over straight away, but you have to move your units into a hostile territory in this phase, right? There's loads and loads of fiddly little rules to do with movement restrictions. There's a section of rules that details with amphibious assaults where you're carrying troops in a transporter and you're trying to get them to do beach landings. We're not going to go into that because it drove me insane. And there's loads of little movement rules for submarines, like for instance an attacker can ignore submarines because they are submersible and they're very difficult to detect, right? So also tanks get the option to blitz, which means that they can move through an unoccupied hostile territory, take it and then move on and then attack a hostile territory with units in it. Ordinarily they'll only be able to just enter a hostile territory and then stop, right? So tanks get that special ability. Right, so once you have moved all of your units into combat zones and you have torn your hair out trying to understand what the rulebook tells you about all the restrictions, then you'll move on to the combat phase. The first thing you'll do is you will do strategic bombing raids on industrial complexes. If you've moved any bombers into areas where there are industrial complexes, you can choose to do that, in which case you'll roll 1 die or 2 if you've got the heavy bombers special ability, and then you'll do that much damage on the industrial complex, right? You've got to remember as well that if there's any anti-aircraft guns in there, they get to fire first, so they'll roll 1 die. They will hit on a 1, right? So then you get into the amphibious assaults nightmare. What you do, you basically check to see if there's sea combat. If there's no sea combat, then battleships and cruisers get to do a bombardment to coastal defences. Forget about that, and then you'll offload your troops and you do a bit of land combat, right? That's basically how it works. Right, once you've got all that crap out of the way, then you'll move on to general combat. What you'll do, you'll take all the units that are involved in the battle and you move them onto the battle board and you'll place them in the relevant position, right? So defenders generally get an advantage here, but what you'll do, the attacker will roll a die for each unit that's in each specific spot, and they will hit on either a 1 for like infantry, they'll hit on a 2 for like a destroyer, and so on and so forth until they've completed all their rolls. You'll move any casualties into the casualty box because they will still get a defensive roll, and then the defender will then have an attack and they'll do exactly the same thing, and then you'll move all of the casualties back into the boxes where they came from, right? They'll all be dead. So you've got to remember that air units cannot capture territories, only land units can do that. So if you've captured a territory, you'll put one of your markers on it, and you may or may not get one of the location tiles, which is your ticket to win in a game, because you're going to win the game. If playing the standard version of the game, you're going to need 15 of these to win, and each side starts with a certain amount. Right. So there's also rules about liberating a capital that's been captured. If your capital's captured, then you're going to have to give all your RPCs up to the occupying force. But you can get liberated, in which case you'll take back control of that power. But you don't take back all the RPCs that were nicked from you. You know what I mean? So once you've done all that, then you'll go into the non-combat move phase, in which case you'll be able to move any of your pieces into non-hostile territories, right, based on their movement rate, yeah. And then the final thing you do, you'll go to the mobilisation spot on the board, you'll take all your units off, and you'll be able to place them into any space that you have got an industrial complex. If you're trying to build an industrial complex, you can place it in any friendly space that you had control of at the beginning of the turn, not in a space you've just conquered. Right. Final phase, collect income. You look at the power's national production level on the National Production Board, and then you'll get that many IPCs. This will be sort of like a back and forth thing. As you capture more territories, you get more IPCs, and as you lose them, then you will lose income, because the more territories you control, the more income you get, but it's going to be more difficult to hold them, you know. So you'll keep doing this, you'll keep going backwards and forwards, beating each other up, building armies, building up your war machine, killing each other, until one side has at least 15 captured strategic locations, and that side will win the game. So what do we like about Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition? So the first thing that we like about this game is it covers all aspects of World War II. You've got all the major theatres of war stuffed into one huge, massive board. You've got the European theatre, you've got the Eastern Front, you've got the Pacific theatre, the Mediterranean theatre, and you've also got the United States on either side of the board, which allows you to move from one side of the world to the other in one swoop. So the fact that they've managed to condense the entire World War II history into one huge sprawling game board. I mean, you saw the size of the box. I mean, that's an understatement. I don't think it really does it justice on my tiny little camera. But the fact that they've taken a massive theatre of war and turned it into, I wouldn't say an easy game to play, but I wouldn't say it was too complex either, is a pretty good thing, right? So the second thing that we really like about Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition is that they have included all these little nuances that happened in World War II. You've got the Chinese in there, right? The American player takes control of the Chinese. The fact they're not an industrialised nation means that they've just basically got a couple of infantry in there. They've got the Flying Tigers fighter aircraft in there, which is a nice little touch. And the way that the powers are quite well balanced and kind of accurately mirrors the strengths and weaknesses of the powers at the time is a really good thing. Like, for instance, the Soviet Union will find it very difficult to build up sea units, and they'll also find it very difficult to build up an air force. They're primarily going to be fighting a land war on the Eastern Front, right? The game does seem to be quite balanced in terms of units, and it does seem to accurately mirror the theatre of World War II, right? So the third thing that we like about Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition is it is quite fun building up your war machine and then unleashing hell on your opponents in not only one position but two positions. I mean, if you think about the British, for instance, they've got a heavy presence in the United Kingdom, but they are cut off. They can produce a lot of units on that small island. They've got the Australian continent as well, and they've also got a presence in the Middle East and North Africa and in South Africa. So the British are spread around quite a lot. If you can get an industrial complex in maybe Australia or India, for instance, then you're going to be able to attack on two fronts, which is a really good thing. So the strategic placement of industrial complexes and the building up of the war machine is one of the more fun aspects of this beast. So what don't we like about Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition? So the first thing that we don't like about this game is it's far too fiddly. Yeah, the amount of units that you're trying to cram on Europe especially is just absolutely bloody ridiculous. I mean, they have included these little discs that can replace units and say that you've got 5 units there or you've got 2 units there, but the chances of you having 5 bombers on a spot in Europe is going to be very, very small. So 2 is not enough, and the discs take up just as much room as another bloody unit, right? So when you're trying to reach in with 2 fingers, trying to pick up the infantry and things get knocked over and it all goes flying, it does do my head right in. So the second thing that we don't like about Axis and Allies, the Anniversary Edition, is that the rulebook is far too dense and it's far too cryptic. I mean, there's massive chunks of text that when you're reading it are sort of indecipherable from my point of view. When you're looking at the amphibious assault rules for the first time, I was sitting there thinking I was reading Sanskrit, and I still don't really understand it. Now we just had to make a best case for it and run with it, right? So the rulebook needs to be rewritten. We couldn't find a rule summary for this that was any more legible. Did we play it correctly? I'm not entirely sure, and that's always a bad thing. So the next thing that we don't like about Axis and Allies, the Anniversary Edition, is this game is far too long. If you play this with 6 players, then you are in for a torrid time, especially if you get saddled with Italy, because Italy doesn't have much to do. There's not many units to mess about with. They don't get much money, and they're just more like a sort of a buffer zone between all of the opposing forces. So I wouldn't recommend this with 6 players. Even with maybe 4 players, the downtime in this is going to be excruciating. You're going to be scratching your eyeballs out waiting for your turn. So I would definitely recommend, if you do get this, then you play it with 2 players only, and then each one of you takes either the Axis or the Allies faction, right? So the next thing that we don't like about Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition is it's really, really difficult to tell the difference between the units. Talking about sea units primarily. When you open this up, there's nothing in the rule book to tell you what each unit looks like, and the fact you've got different models for each faction makes it even worse. When you're setting a game up, you're thinking, is this a cruiser? Is this a destroyer? Is this an Italian transporter, or is it a submarine? It's really, really hard to tell the difference between units, right? And eventually you do get it into your head. Even now I'm thinking, is the destroyer the bit with the flat back, or is that a cruiser? And different units for different factions look very identical. So you might be looking at a destroyer for one unit, right, for the United States, and then you'll look at maybe Japan or something, I don't know, and then that will look similar, or vice versa, you know. So they should have given you some indication as to what each bleeding unit looks like. So the final thing that we don't like, this review is starting to become more like the game, innit? The final thing that we don't like about Axis and Allies, at the end of the day, this is just a bunch of die rolls, right? I mean, I played this with my kid today actually, and we got into a battle with just 2 artillery units, and it went on and on and on. It was just a case of who was going to throw a 1 first, right? And I think we must have had about 15 die throws. That destroyed the ambience of the game for me. It just meant that it was just a random luck fest, and all the strategy that had been building up to that point was just flushed away in a 1942 toilet. So, is Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition worth your time and bother today and in the future? So we're going to say maybe, maybe not. It all depends, right? If you can get someone to set this up for you and you could just walk in and admire their handiwork, then the game isn't going to be as much of an issue. The setup is mind-numbing, right? It was painful. It's a gargantuan World War II simulator that, in my opinion, collapses under its own weight, quite literally, right? It suffers from some really outdated design decisions, like just rolling D6s for combat, and it also moves at a geological pace if you're playing with more than probably 2 players, right? Having said that, it is really quite fun mobilising your troops, building up your war machine, then unleashing your armies onto unsuspecting troops in different locations, right? You can get some really good strategy out of this, and it does mirror certain aspects of World War II sort of accurately. But at the end of the day, this game is far too long, and I would only recommend this to people that love historical games that aren't on the surface that complex, and also people that generally are limited to 2 players only. So for us, this was a fun time, but it wasn't a super fun time, you know. So that's it. That's Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition. Remember, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below, and we'll see you next time.